Good evening, students. Can I make a start or are there more to join? Hello, can you hear me? Seems that I cannot hear you. Just let me check my...
Yes, we can hear you, ma'am.
Okay, now I can hear you, Chandrasekhar. I think I have from my end, it was muted. Can I make a start? Or are there more to join? I'll start at 4:15 then. Okay, we'll make a start. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
it was good.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So in today's lecture, what I'm going to talk about is about the literature survey. There are two parts in today's lecture. One is about literature survey and then the literature review, right? I'm going to do it in like two separate sections. The literature survey is mainly talking about, how to search for the relevant literature, because I'm sure that you have started your research when you do your dissertations. Can someone tell me what stage are you in the dissertation? Hope that you have not met your supervisors yet. Have you been allocated with the supervisors now?
Not yet. No.
Not yet, no? So have you decided a topic or something?
No.
No. So you are just in the early stages. So, okay. So I think this is the ideal time to learn about the literature search then, because you don't, this lecture has two parts. The survey, mainly I'm going to talk about the process of, identifying the useful literature, which will be necessary and important for you to conduct your main research, right? So there are certain, search engines and certain techniques that you need to apply in order to get an effective results of your literature search. So that is one part. The second part is after you have, assume that you have the literature with you now, you have downloaded several papers and all, then what you do, okay, how to review critically and how do you make use of the literature is my second part, right? So I would like to cover both literature survey and the literature review as part of this session. So we will initially start with the literature survey. So before that, so the outline of today's lecture is, first I would like to tell you, what is literature? What do you mean by a literature? Hope if you already know, you already know it. Otherwise, you can just, listen. You must have already done, if you have done as part of your undergraduate dissertations, if you have done a piece of research, we usually called as a dissertation. So it depends on what universities or what background you come from. Certain dissertations, you conduct a research for a year. Some other dissertation, they do the research for 3 months or 6 months. So it varies depending on which institution that you are attached to. But whatever the research that you have conducted, I'm sure that you must have done a small part of the literature review, right? So the literature review is one of the key things that is kind of throughout your research process. When you properly start your dissertation, after, selecting the topics and the supervisors, and when you conduct the research, and until you submit and face your viva for your final dissertation, the literature review plays a crucial role, right? So it is not just that you do the literature at the initial stage of the research and stop there, or you start later, middle of the research. It doesn't work like that, because the literature is kind of part and parcel of your whole journey of your research dissertations. Okay, therefore you have to be familiarized with what is literature and how do you refer that, how do you search that, and how do you review, and how do you interpret and report a good, decent piece of work out of your literature review, right? And you need some skills in order to do that. So I wanted you to, understand what are the key skills that are needed if you want to perform a good literature survey and literature review. And there are stages in the literature review. I will slightly touch on that, and part of the stages, one of the stages where you need to really search for the literature, right? Because the information nowadays, with all the technological advancement and all, we do have enough information. Whatever you type, Google it, or AI platform, or anywhere, when you feed if you want to find out something, you can always get that, right? But how reliable the information that you really get, right? Whether it is a validated information, or whether it is reliable information, whether the information that you gather has some credibility, accountability. That all matters, right? So we are like overloaded with loads of information on the website, but you cannot use each and every or anything and everything that you find out there in order for you to produce a research work, right? So when it's come to a research dissertation, the information, the literature that you get, where do you look at it? Okay, from where do you get it? It really matters, right? So for your knowledge, you can get it from anywhere, right? So even if you Google it, Wikipedia is one of the sites which I quite frequently use. To whatever you want to know, find out anything and everything, any topic, then you type, you get the knowledge, right? So you can use all the sources in order to get the knowledge. But when you wanted to review a literature, when you wanted to produce a literature chapter for your dissertation, for an academic paper or an academic journal, there are certain sources which you have to limit your literature search. So you cannot get the literature from everywhere. Okay, so I'm going to just talk about mainly where to look at the literature search. And as part of this presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on that, right? And moving on, if you take literature review, so hope that you already know what is a literature review. If you haven't, I personally view the literature review in two perspectives. One is literature review as a product. The other one is as a process. So when you say literature review as a product, it is simply a secondary source of data available in your field. So literature review, what do you mean by literature is what is already out there in a published format. So that is basically literature. So it can be published in a journal, it can be published in a conference paper, it can be published on an online database or an online website or a magazine or on a newspaper article, or it can be anywhere, but it is a secondary source. That means you are not the person who really collect the data primarily. You only gather the data which is already out there, right? So the literature is generally considered as a secondary sources of data available in your field of study. And also it gives a current view. So the literature actually presents you with the current view of the relevant issues on the subject, right? For example, if you are doing a research on health and safety in construction industry, and if you wanted to find out what is the rate of accidents in the construction sites or high-rise building, wherever your focus is, and if you can gather the data, the statistics from somewhere, and then it tells you the current view, okay, what is happening. Or you can also find out a historical data. Maybe if you refer back the literature for the last 10 or 20 years, 2 decades, then from that last 20 years, how the accidents rate have changed over the period of time in the construction industry. So for you to know that, you can refer the literature, right? So it actually gives you the current as well as the historical view of the relevant issues on the subject. And obviously, it will sit as one of your major sections, one of the main chapters in your dissertation. So when you submit your dissertation, finally, after conducting your research, after completing your MSc, in the dissertation, literature review is one of the key chapters, right? So that is one of your main chapters. So you must, whether you like it or not, you have to provide a literature review. You cannot submit a master's thesis without having a literature review chapter, right? So even though we see this as a product, what I gather is when you do the literature review, the activity, it actually, the literature review can also be considered as a process, because it is kind of a knowledge enhancement exercise what you are doing. So when you read more and more literature, naturally you gain more and more knowledge, right? It's like reading news and articles. So when you read newspaper every day, so you know what is happening around the world, around your country and everything, right? If you don't read, you don't know. Similarly, in your field of study, if you want to know more about it, what you need to do is you have to simply read more in the field of research that you are doing, right? Whatever the area that you select, there will be enough literature available for you to read, right? So if you are doing a research in the construction industry, then probably you'll have to read in the construction related papers. If you are doing research on health sector, then there are set of literature available related to the health sector, right? So it doesn't matter where your discipline fits or where your research focus are. The knowledge gathering and improvement is part of the one of the main gain when you do your literature review, right? And also it will help you to get yourself familiarized with the subject, because when you are doing something new, okay, relatively new, or if you want to do a research on something, a concept which you have never done it, right? Something like, we'll say, circular economy or BIM, okay? So you name it, whatever the concept, which is, you're not very much familiar, but you still like to do a research on that. You want to explore how the BIM helps to, manage the projects better, right? Or how the BIM helps to manage the documentation in the industry, right? If you want to do that, but you don't know much about BIM, then what you can do is you can read more about it, right? Then what will happen is, when you read more about it, then you get yourself familiarized with the subject. Okay, so the literature is, don't take that as a, as an exam or an exercise that you must do for your research. When you really understand the value of doing a literature, sometimes you naturally get into it and get yourself interested with the literature review process, right? Because knowledge enhancement will always help you to understand the phenomenon better and understand your research area better. And then you can also write it will help you to not only familiarize with the subject, also it will help you to improve your knowledge and the skills, right? So the way of writing, when you read different research papers, mainly the academic journals and conference papers and articles, then you will get a style. You get used to the style of writing an article. Okay, so you can just follow that. That will naturally happen. It doesn't happen overnight, right? I'm not saying that you read one paper and you write tomorrow the same way. It won't happen like that. But along with the process, when you do that again and again and again, finally the skill development, it will happen, right? So when you read more, you try to understand the words, you get yourself familiarized with the terminologies, the variables involved in your field of study, and also it will help you to understand, interpret the way you want it to do. And then when you write it and then you extract the literature and put it in your own words, then it will help you to improve your language skills as well. So it helps as a skill development process. And also it will help you to refer the related research and theory in your field, right? So there are theories available, the well-established theories are there, right? Or non-validated theories are also there. So whatever it is, when you are doing a research, if you really wanted to see what is the theory behind it, then the literature really helps you, right? For example, if you wanted to identify the leadership styles of a project manager in an industry that you are working with. So if you really wanted to find out the leadership theories, what are the styles exhibited by a project manager when managing a project, then you can really read about the leadership theories, right? So how the leadership styles evolved. Okay, so there are a lot of well-established theories within the leadership. Right? So depending on the area of research, some research will have, definite theories, established theories. Some areas doesn't have a theory. You don't have to worry about it. But if you have theories, always try to understand the theory and relate those theory in your literature. Okay. So, and it helps you to explore, right, in the field in which you do your research. So whatever the field that you are selecting an area to do a research, when you conduct a literature review in that field, it helps you to explore more in the same field of research so that you get to know more about it, right? And in the forms, when you say literature, it is coming in various forms, right? So you can, even books, when you read books in order to gather the knowledge, it is part of the literature. Any articles, it can be journal papers, conference papers, newspapers, right? Anything that comes on a particular subject that will qualify for a literature review. And it can be printed materials such as books, leaflets, brochures, and all. And also it can be available in a soft form, right? So nowadays we don't only have the literature. Most of the literature come online. People don't print it, but you can read it online. Even the books are now available online, right? So there is a because of this technology, so we have anywhere remotely you can access any books and journals, which is a good thing. So you don't have to come. If you live far from university, for example, you don't have to come to the university all the time in order to browse the material, right? So hope that you are effectively using the library, because you have your university account, student account, email address with which you can access all your library. So make use of that, because most of the library materials are now in the form of email, right? And so when you say scientific literature, it is mainly, we call it a scientific literature when the writing is on a particular subject, right? So you usually, when you do a literature review for a dissertation, you mainly go with the scientific literature, right? Books are referred, right? Mainly when you are doing coursework, for example, when you're doing a subject, so sustainable development. And if you wanted to know about, okay, what is sustainable development, maybe you can find some books for that. But when you're doing a scientific literature, that is a very focused area on a very particular domain, then probably the scientific literature is more useful for your literature review when you do the dissertation. So the literature review, in summary, is a comprehensive and up-to-date overview of a published information on a subject area. The reason I tell up-to-date overview is when you are doing a literature review for your research, always make sure that you go with the latest literature, right? Say, for example, the same example I give you again, if you wanted to find out, okay, the health and safety, addressing the health and safety in construction industry, right? So what are the project managers' role to address health and safety or improve health and safety in a construction industry? Then you get some literature, the literature which is like 5 years older or 10 years older, and which talks about some accident rates and all. So that data is not valid anymore, because if you wanted to do a research in a contemporary basis or present context, current research, having an outdated data is not going to help you to, develop whatever the strategies that you want to propose in order to improve the health and safety, because you need to first know what is the current situation, what is the current status of the construction industry in terms of health and safety, right? Therefore, when you're reading the literature, always make sure whether it is an up-to-date publication, okay, or recent publications. One of the common mistakes most of the MSc students do when they write their synopses and all, they come up with some literature review, but some literature review are quite outdated, right? So what do I mean by current literature is not, I don't mean that it should be dated today or anything. At least within 10 years of literature, within the decades, we consider that is a recent literature, right? Because development happens it takes time for changes to happen. So I don't expect you to use 2023, 2022 all the time. Even 10 years and later is considered as a current literature, right? So don't go for more than 10 year or decade older literature or papers that are considered as kind of outdated when it's come to research, right? And it is an account of what has been published on a topic by accredited scholars and researchers. So this is one of the important points, because as I mentioned earlier, you don't find the literature, just you don't Google it and just get any source. You have to make sure whether the article is published on a recognized publishers or recognized material. So if it is a journal paper or a conference paper, it's usually reviewed by at least 2 or 3 peer reviewers, and it is improved a lot before it is published online or published in a book format. So before the publication, there is a rigorous review process, usually for all the scientific papers that are published in journals and conferences. It is going through that rigorous review process. Then there is a level of credibility. So if you take something from one of such papers and tell, okay, these authors talk about this thing, and it is not just an information, because they have done a proper research, they have analyzed it and concluded it, and it was reviewed by so many people and then finally published, right? So as long as it is accredited by scholars and researchers, then it has a credibility and validity in your literature, right? So therefore, the literature is not just a list of all the materials published. So everything that are published, we don't consider that as a literature, okay? And also, the literature review is not summarizing of one piece of literature after another. So that I will come further, I will elaborate this point when I do about the literature review. So sometimes what the students do is, when they have like 5 papers, they read one paper and summarize that paper. They read the second paper and summarize that paper, right? Paper by paper, you don't have to summarize literature. Then there is no review there. It's just a reporting of the same literature in a shortened form, right? So that is not what you call a literature. Literature means you read all 5 papers and then you understand all the 5 papers and find out what is the common element across the papers, what are the differences in the argument between the papers, and then you think about it and you write based on those 5 papers. Whatever you produce as a new submission is called a literature review. It is not a summary of other authors, what others have done. Therefore, it needs some critical look at the existing research, because it is not a summary. You need to really review and analyze and argue and put your interpretation, whether you have to say your voice there, whether you agree. You don't have to necessarily agree everything that is out there, right? Even if it is published, you can still argue against it, because you have the experience. You come from the industry, you have the experience. You can tell, okay, the literature talks about this, but in the industry, it is not the actual practice. Okay, so you can tell your viewpoints there, right? So it has to take some criticality in when you write your literature review, especially at a master's level. Okay, so you have to critically look at the existing research, and you have to see whether it is significant for your work and then that you are carrying out, and then you have to write about it. So in order for you to do that, you need to have some skills, right? Some key skills you need in order to conduct a proper literature review, right? The one skill is information seeking, right? Information seeking in the sense you should identify exactly what you need to know, right? So you cannot start with the blank paper. You need to start from somewhere. So from where that you should decide first, right? Because there are disciplines, so different contexts, so many different industries, right? You don't have to do research on everything, right? So you first decide, okay, where do you place yourself, or where do you position yourself in the industry, or which subject you would like to do, right? So the topic selection is most important. When you select the topic and when you decided what you need to do, it's okay for you to take some time and do that, because once you have done the topic selection and once you have started the literature review, then it is not advisable for you to go back and change your topic, right? Therefore, I usually suggest my students to take some more time to do the topic selection. You had to think and decide the topic selection, And then you start your literature review. And where do you seek the information, where to look for it? You have to really know what are the potential, identify the potentially useful books. So if you want to gather this knowledge, these are the journals, right? If you're doing something on health sector, then the medical journals are more useful rather than the construction and economics journal. So if you are doing something related to construction, then there are a lot of journals which are related to the built environment. Okay, likewise, for discipline-wise, the journals are there. So you should know where to look at it. So that's information seeking is one of the important skills. And then the other information seeking skill is scan the literature, keep the records and notes. So the one of the main weaknesses of most of our students is that, right? So what they do is they just gather the knowledge, gather the literature, they just search it, and there will be a list of papers. So what they usually do is they download all the PDFs and put it in a folder, right? For them to later read when the time comes for the literature review. But before doing that process, a small thing I suggest is to just scan the paper. You don't have to read from A to Z. You just scan the literature to quickly establish the worthiness of the material. Because sometimes when you download some paper, when you start reading it, it will give you an indication, okay, this is not a very useful paper. This is nothing to do with your research or nothing to do with what you're really looking for. So you can quickly establish that, whether it is a worthy material or not, right? The other thing is keeping records. At least noting what is the paper that you downloaded, whether it's a journal or a conference, who are the authors, who is the publishers, what is the year. So very basic data about it's kind of a reference, right? If you keep the records and notes, why I am telling this is because sometimes when you start downloading a lot of papers, there's a high chance that you overlook some of them. And some papers are very important, some papers are not important. So if you don't have a record about what are the papers talks about, then what will happen is when you, along with the process, because in the MSc, you're not going to, it's not going to finish within a short period. No? So it will take 1 year, right? So during the 1 year period, if you wanted to refer back a literature which you downloaded at the very first day, how do you find it? You have no way to find it unless you open every single file, PDF, and see what is the information that you're looking for. So the keeping records and notes about a paper will help you to at least establish a good database at the beginning, right? Whether you need it or not, it doesn't matter. Whenever you download a paper, just scan the paper and take a record on. Simply state who are the authors, and this paper talks about the barriers of something. So that is the main focus of the paper. That's all you have to record. Right? Then what will happen is if you really wanted to talk about the barriers and in your database, you can say, okay, you can know which paper to open. Right? So this is one of the good practices, but you have to start from the very beginning. The moment that you start downloading the papers, you have to get into that practice. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Right? So if you have already downloaded like 20 papers, after that, keeping records will not happen properly. Right? So the information seeking has those two aspects, where to look at it and how to record it. The second skill is the analytical and critical review skill, because the analytical critical review skills is you have to establish whether this paper is relevant or not. Right? What is the relevance of the paper that you are reading? You should know when reading a paper, reading a journal, or reading a literature, you should know whether it is really relevant to your research. Right? So that is the kind of a skill actually, because sometimes you don't, until you finish reading the full paper, you don't realize whether it is relevant or not. Right? But some paper you can quickly establish. So it is a part of the skill development process, the critical review of the skill, right? So because you have to, if the relevance is not there, then what will happen is finally your outcome also will not be that much relevant or that much good, right? So if you want to do research on apples, you can't read about oranges, okay? You have to read about apples. Then only the relevance will be there, okay? So wherever you want to do the research, you have to read the materials also should be relevant to that, right? So for that, you need to have an analytical skill, right? And it should be conceptually organized synthesis. What do you mean by conceptually organized synthesis? The term might look at a high level term, but it's basically what it tells is whether you can organize the concept. Right? So what is the concept that you are talking, or what is the concept that you are researching into? Whether all the papers that you are reading, whether the concept is there. Whether you, across the paper, whether you can see the relevance of the same concept talking. If you say, for example, if you have 10 papers, all the 10 papers, whether you can relate the 10 papers with your concept, then you can easily organize and synthesize papers relating to that concept, right? So we will talk more about the synthesis when it's come to the critical review. And the other one is reflection. So one of the main things the students fail to do that. Okay, so in the literature review, what they do is they read, they understand, and then write. They don't reflect. They don't think about the outcomes. What you have written on your dissertation, you should be thorough with why you have written. Every single sentence before you put on your dissertation, you should know why the sentence is there, whether it is really needed for your dissertation. What you are writing is really relevant to your aims and objective, right? If you keep on asking that questions again and again, then you can always, it will help you to keep on track, right? If you don't see, so you're reading a paper, writing something out of it, but you don't see a connection between what you are writing and what is your aim of a research, then that means you are doing something wrong. So you can realize, okay, it is not what you needed. Okay, so you have to think about the outcome. So when you read a paper, generate the understanding, and even if you extract the main points from a paper and write it on your dissertation, it's fine. But think again and see whether these outcomes are really relevant for your research. The other one is writing and reporting skills. So it is information seeking is a key skill, and then you critically analyze and review. But what you have done, all of this, so you have captured the right information, we'll assume, and you have read all the papers and understood thoroughly. But finally, if you cannot write that in your dissertation, right? If you cannot produce an output based on that, then that will actually fail the whole effort that you have taken. Okay, so the writing and reporting skills are very important, because that is the only way that the examiners and your supervisors can know how good that you are in your research, right? So you can tell them, okay, you have done all the good research, good the reading, I have got very thorough knowledge. Then what? They will ask you, okay, show me what you have gathered in a piece of writing. Then if you don't write, then what will happen is you fail. The whole process will fail if you don't produce properly what you have gathered. So the writing and reporting skills are very important when it's come to the literature, especially when you are using your language, the English. If you can get help from, proofreadings or the final, not from the initial, but the final MSc thesis, you can proofread if you're not confident with your English. But the basic understanding, basic language should be appropriate, right? And you can get the help from Grammarly, the Rightful. There are softwares available for you to actually improve your language skill, right? So it is not our mother tongue, so we should agree that. But in an academic writing, there is a way to write it, right? So that appropriateness should be there. Okay. So when you're writing an article for a newspaper, right? And when you're writing an article for an MSc thesis, or when you're writing an article for a conference paper, you have to have 3 different styles, right? At least 2 different styles, because when it's come to the academic journal, so academic papers, the writing style and the language will be different, right? So you really need to learn how to write. So for that, what you have to do is you have to read the previous MSc dissertations, and you can get an idea how it is written, and you can help with the help, obviously, with the help of your supervisors, you can build up that skills as well. And present the outcomes in a proper order, right? So systematically you have to, you when you do the research, when you are doing the reading, probably you are not systematic at all. Okay, you don't read in an order, probably you read this and that and everything together, but finally when you put it in writing, it has to be in a logical order and logical way of presenting your full report, so the readers can easily understand what your research is all about, right? And the citing references, that is also I have put as a skill, because some of the students, what they do is they simply don't put the citation at all, right? So that actually qualify for a plagiarism, because what you mean by plagiarism is you are trying to, steal someone else's idea and put it in as your own, right? That is called plagiarism. So when you read something, you get the idea, even though you don't need to write 1-to-1 in their words, you don't have to, you just get their idea and you write it on your own words, still you have to put the citation, because the idea is not your own idea. Okay, so that you got the idea from somewhere else, it's someone else's idea, right? Even though you put it in your own words, some students think that because they write it in their own words, you don't have to cite, you don't have to put the reference, but which is wrong. It is a wrong perception or the concept that students have it, right? Even if you write it in your own words, even if you copy someone else's idea, you have to give the citation for that. So always make sure when you're writing the literature review, that is one of the chapters which have the highest number of citation. When you do your analysis or the data collection, where you do the primary data, you go and collect your data first-handedly, you talk to the people, get the interviews, and from what you listen from the people or experts, and you write. For that, you don't need any references, because you are not putting up any secondary data there, right? So in that chapter, you don't need that many references. But literature chapter is mainly you look at what is already published, and you gather, and then you write your own literature, which is relating the existing knowledge to your study. Okay, in that case, the citation of the references, citing the references is very important. So when the information seeking skill, it is basically the literature survey. That is the focus that I'm going to do here. The ability to scan the literature efficiently using manual or computerized method to identify a set of useful articles and books. So if you have a good information seeking skill, what is the outcome is you will get this list of articles which are very relevant and very necessary to your research. Okay, that is the outcome of it. So if you do research properly, and if you know where to search, then it is easier for you to efficiently do your information seeking. And why do we need to do a literature review? So before coming to the process of literature survey, I also would like to highlight the need. Sometimes this is not like you have to do it anyway. It is not, anyway you have to do it, but you need to, if you understand the importance or the significance of doing a literature review, I think it will help you to do your literature review in an efficient manner, right? Because you should understand, it helps you to provide information, a background information about the research topics, okay? Think about a research topic, any topic that you would like to do, right? Without reading about that topic, you cannot, move further, from the topic, right? Even to find out what you need to do. So you have a topic in mind. You might have a topic or the subject in mind, something like, project manager skills or health and safety, BIM. Okay, any topic you can have it in mind. But further, if you wanted to find out, okay, what do you want to do? What is your research topic? What is the area that you want to focus within that BIM? Then, of course, you have to read, right? So the literature actually helps you to provide background information about the research, right? It helps to avoid reinventing the wheel, because if you don't read and if you just think about an area and a topic and a research aims and objective and just do a research primary only without looking at the literature, you might end up in a situation where you reinventing the same wheel, right? The research is already done by someone else and you are doing again. That shouldn't be happening in your MSc, because whatever the topic that you do or whatever the research, no matter how small the focus is, your novelty is very significant. Whatever you do, it shouldn't have been done by anyone else. Okay, so that novelty must be there. So that is the key in any research, right? There should be a difference. So what is your research should be unique. Only you are the person who should have done it, right? You cannot do a research which is already done by some other MSc students or whoever it is. Okay, so how do you know? So this research has not been already done by someone else. If you don't do a literature review, you will never know it. Okay, so the literature review actually helps you about avoid reinventing the wheel, right? And also it helps you what has been so far done on the research, because you are not you are doing a research on a particular topic, and when you search about the topics, you might find out, okay, there were hundreds of papers coming up. That means so many others are also doing the same research, right? Even though it is not exactly the same research as you do, okay, it can be the same similar area, but in a different context, similar area in a different country, right? Then what you can do is, by reading a literature, you can find out, okay, it will help you, okay, what others have done in this area and what more to be done in this area. So have they found out any solution? Partly. Have the solution developed, been tested and validated, or were they successful? So by reading the literature only, you can find out the answers. So the problem and the answers, and to what extent the answers problem has been answered. And then you can find out, okay, where the gap, okay, what more to be done. So that is where you have to focus your research. Okay, so this I have already talked, is help you to get yourself familiarized and help you to find out your significance, the importance of the topic, right? And also help you to narrow down a research topic, right? If you read only, you can find out, okay, these topics have been narrowed down to this, right? So you can find out a way to, narrow down, in the sense, giving a focus to the topic, right? You can narrow down to a particular problem, or you can narrow down to a particular industry, or you can narrow down to a particular country. It depends on your topic. You can narrow it down, right? So in order to narrow down, what you need is a literature review. Without literature review, you cannot actually even focus on, you can decide on where to focus, right? And it helps you to provide the intellectual context for your work. It will allow you to, in other words, position your work relative to other work. So there are, as I mentioned, there are so many different researchers doing the research on the similar area that you are interested. So where do you position yourself? Okay, so you should find a space which is not occupied by anyone else, which is the space for you only in the research area. So that is, the literature only helps you to place your position in the literature domain. So when you do your literature review search, there are several questions that you have to ask for yourself. Some are like, what are the key sources and who are the key authors? Okay. What are the key theories? As I said earlier, the leadership, so there are key theories in the leadership theories are there, right? Whether there are any key theories in your area. What are the main problem that needs to be addressed? Because research, you cannot do, if there is no problem, then there is no research, right? What do you mean by a research? Research is simply finding a solution for a problem, right? But if you cannot come up with the problem, then why do you don't have to do a research, right? If there's no problem, why do you need to find out an answer, right? So, but in order to find out what is the problem in that area, you need to do a reading. Literature review actually helps you to see what is the problem, right? And what are the methodologies? Even the literature helps you to use what are the methods that you, whether this problem, because in the some similar problem, some other authors have used a case study approach to answer the problem. So it just gives you an indication, okay, this kind of problem can be answered through a case study research, right? You don't need to know what a case study is, then you learn about it. Then you can also adopt a case study. So in order to even decide on the methodology, the literature review helps, right? And how this knowledge is, inbuilt in the literature, and what are the different perception towards the problem, right? And what is the major topics, debates about the problem, what are the political standpoints, and there are so many different points, viewpoint that you can generate by asking some questions in your literature review. So while you are doing a literature review, always make sure that keep on asking these questions for yourself so that it is easier for you to focus and be on the track and do your literature more efficiently. A good literature review, it will be organized around and related directly to the topic. As I mentioned, always the relevance is important, right? Sometimes some students write a dissertation, some sections are there in the literature chapter, and we haven't got a clue why these chapters are there. Because it is nothing to do with your main topic or aims or objective. It is not relevant to the topic at all, right? So then when you write a piece of work like that in your dissertation, then the examiners will get actually disappointed, because even if you cannot relate a topic or a piece of literature with your own topic, then that actually shows you the lack of understanding of your own topic, isn't it? So you have to always, your topic should be directly related to your research area. All the literature that you write should be related to your research area. And it should give an overview of the subject and understudy. So if you're talking about something, you have to give an overview, because the readers are not necessarily having that knowledge. For example, if you're doing something on a technology, if I don't know about the technology, but still I should be able to understand by reading your dissertation, because you should give an overview of the subject. You have to explain what is the technology that you're talking about. What are the key things that others should understand, should know about the technology, right? And how the technology has developed over the time, and what are the gaps in the knowledge. Okay, so gaps in knowledge, if you don't understand the term gaps in knowledge, I'll again revisit in the second part of my lecture about the critical review. So you need to really know what is the gap in knowledge, right? And also you can identify some areas for agreement and disagreement, okay? So some authors agree to a point, some other papers, the same point is disagreed by several authors, right? Then you as a researcher, you have to gather both, and you have to your standpoint. What is your view on it, right? So it actually helps you to increase your depth as well as the breadth of the knowledge on your subject area. Okay. So, and also it will help you, one thing is it is help you to ensure the researchability of your topics. There are certain topics that students might take it, but it cannot be researchable. Right? Even we obviously know there is a problem. Probably if you don't know how to research that topic, how to address that problem, the topic is not researchable, then you can't do a dissertation. Right? So all will help you, if you do a good literature review, it will actually help you to come out of all of these questions. Right? So in a literature review stages, if you look at a literature review, so it is a process. I said, if you consider the literature review as a process, first you have to plan your review, right? Planning your literature review is very important, because if you don't plan, then you can, when you start, after starting, you cannot plan, right? Planning is something that you should do before that, right? Similar to project management, project planning. Right? After the project started and halfway through, you cannot make plans now. The plan should always come in advance. Then only you can effectively manage the project. Similarly, you have to literature review also. You have to plan your review in advance. And then you carry out a search for the relevant material. So that is, we are going to, focus on that, how to do a search. And once you have done the search, then you have to evaluate the materials and then analyze the findings, and then you draft and revise your own review. So it's kind of a stages are there, but it is these, there's no, you can't draw line between the stages, because you will never know when you finish the first stage and start the second stage. So these boundaries are very blurred and it's not clear, because it is a continuous process. Sometimes when you plan, you partly carry out the search and partly evaluate and analyze and draft. So probably all of these can happen simultaneously, or it can happen one after the other sequentially. So it depends on how do you do your literature. But basically all these stages are there, right? So when you plan your literature, what type of literature review that you are going to write, it is necessary whether you are going to write a literature review for a dissertation, right? And then we have to begin by asking, what is the focus, what is the type, what are the scope, what is your discipline, right? If you have to ask these questions, right? Focus in the sense, what's the specific problem or the question that your literature review will address? What is your research problem? What you are trying to solve, what problem you are trying to solve. It's okay. So you have to then, if your focus is then very clear, okay, you want to improve the health and safety, right? I'll stick to that example, improve the health and safety in the construction industry, then you have to stick to the focus, right? And you know exactly where to look at it. You have to read the articles that are in the construction industry, read the articles that are related to health and safety practices, right? And what type of literature that you are conducting, right? Is it something health and safety related policies you want to read, health and safety related theories you want to read, right? Whether you want to look at some statistics, how it has happened, or what is the status of health and safety, some quantitative statistics or studies you want to look at it, or you have to look at it some qualitative ways to improve or enhance the health and safety, right? What type of literature you have to plan and decide, right? And the scope, what is the scope of the material that you will include? So you're going to scope it down only to Sri Lanka, or you are going to scope it down all the health and safety in construction industry in a global context, or you want to scope it only for the high-rise building, health and safety in high-rise buildings only, or residential buildings only. Likewise, you have to plan your scope, and then it will direct you to the right way path to literature review, right? And the discipline, here I said the construction, health and safety in construction. Probably if you are coming from different background, the health and safety in, we'll say, manufacturing organization. Health and safety in a garment factory. What are the health and safety measures or the policy available in a garment factory? That's a completely different literature review. So you can't, if you're doing a health and safety practices in construction, and if someone else is doing a health and safety practices in garment factory, for example, or a manufacturing industry, these two students will have some literature that are common, some literature which is talking about the health and safety policies, theories, etc., will be common. But the context-specific literature, one student will look related to construction-related literature, other students will look into garment factory or the manufacturing industry-related literature. Okay? So the two different set of literature. So if you don't know the discipline and if you don't have these answers for these questions, what is your focus, what are the type, and what is your scope and discipline, then you cannot really, properly plan for your literature review. And when you search for the literature, the one key thing is you have to identify the keywords, right? Keywords is because when you can't search a complete topic. So you have a topic developed for your dissertation. You don't need to insert your whole topic into the Google, right? Then you won't get the proper results. What you need to do is you have to include only the keywords, because the different papers, there won't be an identical topic as your research topic, because you are doing a research, isn't it? So your topic will be unique. So when you put that as a topic in the Google, then the results will not be there. But what you can do is you can put the keywords, right? So when you put health and safety, for example, there will be lots of papers coming up because many researchers are doing research related to health and safety, right? And if you want to do the health and safety and built environment or the construction factory basis, whatever the context, then you put both together, then it will filter, the search will be to your topic. So the keywords, identification of the keywords is very important, because keywords is a key thing. The words that you are using as a key, right, in order to conduct your literature search. But if the keywords are wrong, then your search, the outcome also will be different, right? And you can carry out a search for the relevant materials. You can use your library catalogs or online databases. Journals are most of the journals nowadays are electronic, right? Or printed journals are available as well. Books, some of the books are now even e-books are available, but if you want to go for the books, best way to go to the library, walk into the Moratuwa library and, browse the shelves if you really wanted to, if you're really after books, right? There are acts, legislation, case laws if you're doing something related to disputes, okay, any project management related disputes or anything related to legal side of it, or if you want to look at the legality of the role or something, probably some act and legislation or contract document case laws will be there. Newspaper articles might be useful if it is something very trendy, which you don't have journal papers. Usually you do it during the COVID. There were several research done by the students, but they did not have any literature because the COVID is quite new to us and even around the world. So during the 2020, 2021, we did not have, now we have enough literature on COVID, but during that time, during the pandemic, no literature, published literature available, but still students did some research using the, on that topic. For that, what they have mainly used is the newspaper articles. Okay, so they use the newspaper articles in order to, publish the, in order to do the research related to COVID. So that is also possible, but certain area, if you don't have enough articles published, then you can rely on magazine, newspapers, and government policies, reports, statistics, and information, right? And even thesis dissertation, your past thesis dissertation of your Moratuwa library, you can go and refer the previous research done by the MSc students, right? And also see whether they are available to you, right? Whether you have the online access, right? And the skim the initial group of articles to see whether they make useful contribution. Duplicate those are the most central to topic. So you have to first see whether these articles are really relevant and supporting your research, and then you can find out what is your primary article and what is your secondary article. So you can actually categorize the literature, whether the primary literature or secondary literature, right? So the primary literature is mainly presents or comments upon the results of the research activities, because when you have primary literature, it has all the primary data, mainly the journal papers, peer-reviewed journal articles come under primary research literature, because you can not only see only the results, you also see the methodology. You know how many data, how many questionnaires they have done, how many interviews they have done, how did they derive the results, how did they analyze. Everything is there in the paper, right? So that's kind of a primary literature, because you know inside out how the research was conducted and how the results were derived, right? Secondary literature, it interprets and analyzes the primary literature, but sometimes only the outcome is there, right? So you don't have any primary information there. The final outcomes are there, mostly the magazine articles. If you go to a magazine articles, right, or textbooks in books, they will get only secondary literature, because you just gather the knowledge, but you don't know the process of how the research have been conducted. So for the MSc, these both are useful. If you really wanted to gather some theoretical knowledge, the secondary literature is useful. If you wanted to find out, what are the current trends around your area and what is happening in your area, if you wanted to, update your knowledge with the methodological aspect, how the research was conducted, similar research studies have been conducted elsewhere, the primary literature will be helpful, right? And there are several tools that are available in order to help you to do the literature search. University Library Catalog is one of those. So you can browse it online, even remotely offline. You don't have to come to the university, but if you visit the library, you can log into one of the computers in the library and you can access the university catalog, right? Internet search engines, especially one that offer advanced search features, rather than just simply Google it, you can go to Google and show you the Google Scholar as well. Google Scholar, because the same thing, when you just Google it, it search the relevant topic across the whole database. But when you go to the Scholar Google, it will only search the relevant topic within the academic journals and articles and conferences. Therefore, whatever the outcome that you gather when you search through the Google Scholar will be more relevant to your dissertation rather than simply Google it. But when you simply Google it, the results will come from every source. But Google Scholar will give you the source only which is academically accepted, right? And there are databases. I don't know whether you have been to that. So mostly like Emerald, Scopus, Science Direct, these are databases which gather so many different journals, right? They're not publishers, they're just databases. So if you go to the Scopus, all the journals that are indexed in Scopus, they will have several huge collection of scientific journals. And then you can search your research topic within those journals and access, right? So, and electronic journals, e-journals, are most of our journals nowadays are electronic journals. And bibliographies. So this is one of the important thing I wanted to tell, because some students always, come with a complaint saying that they don't have enough literature for their topic, right? For the topic they selected, there are difficult to find literature. right? So certain topics, it is there. So I totally agree with, there are certain topics for that, there are huge amount of literature available. And there are certain types of topics that you don't find any literature. So that is anyway there. But the bibliography is one of the sections in any paper that you can find out. It gives you the list of literature used for a research paper. Say, for example, if you go to, if you download just one good paper relevant to your topic, right? Assume that you don't have enough literature on your topics, but you manage to find one good journal, right? What you need to do is you go to the list of bibliography or list of references at the end of your journal. Then that list will give you, so one journal is written based on, we'll say 20 other journals. Then you have already 20 papers identified for your topic. Then what you need to do is you have to individually visit those 20 papers and go to the bibliography or the reference list of those journals. And likewise, you can expand your database, right? So don't think that there won't be any paper. If you can find out just one paper that is good enough from that kind of a snowball technique, that you can, from one paper, you can, from the list of reference, you can gather several papers. And if you revisit the individual paper, original sources, then you can find out more and more papers, right? So always make sure that when you read the paper, you also browse the bibliography in any key text about your topic, because bibliography will give you an idea what are the different areas or what are the different papers published around your area. Okay, so this is the library website snapshot. So when you go to the e-resources, you can see the databases, journal, open access journal, ebooks, thesis, dissertation, research conference papers, and index journal. Thesis and dissertation, probably only after 2 years of the submission of the thesis only it will be available in library databases, because usually the thesis, the students and the supervisors restrict the open access for the 2 years so that they can, produce some publication papers out of the thesis. Because of that, you might not find latest thesis like this year or last year thesis won't be available, but the previous dissertation might be available. Okay, so if you go to one of these, for example, if you go to the journals, then you can see all the different journals in an alphabetical order, right? You can use a search options in order to search a particular journal. If you are aware of the journal name, then you can simply search, right? Databases, this is what I told, these are the databases. So it is just Emerald is one of the popular databases that we use. If you go to the Emerald, they have a lot of sets of journals available, right? Their scope is any research which is related to accounting, management, human resource management, marketing, librarianship, engineering, social science, and education. So if your discipline falls under these, then you can go to the Emerald Insight, right? If your discipline is art and architecture, then you can go to Government Art Online. Likewise, the disciplines are there and the databases are there. It is not a one journal. Under the Emerald database, you can find several journals, right? So likewise, if you go inside, you can go to here. So if you're doing something related to, we'll say, education, right? In universities or based on higher education or something, then probably you can click that. Then you can find the journals that are related to this particular discipline, right? If you want to do something related to property management and built environment, you have to go to that database. These are the different disciplines which are contained in the Emerald database. Right? So click the property management and built environment, and under that, can you see here all the different publications? These are journals name. Facilities is one journal. Built environment, project and asset management is another journal. Construction innovation is another journal. These are only journals, right? So when you go to the built environment property and asset management, one particular journal, and then it has so many articles and issues and so many papers inside. Then you can go to a particular paper there. Okay, likewise, this is how you browse. So you go to the e-resources. Here, I've shown only one example. So go to journals, and then the databases. Under databases, the Emerald Insight. Under that, the property management. And then you can see several journals list out there. Use of search engine. You can either go to, when you say sustainable construction, for example, you can go to advanced search. If you go to the settings in the Google, you can go to advanced search, where the advanced search option will give you more filtering options. So you can see whether you want to have all the words or whether you want to have the exact phrase, right? Or any of the combination of the words, or whether you shouldn't have these words. None of these words should be there in the search. Then there is a column for that as well. Whether the language should be English, or what is the region, what is the time, the latest update, whether it is a recent paper that you want or not. So if you go to the advanced search only, you can filter those options in a Google, and then you can search. So that will be more advanced rather than just searching, just typing the sustainable construction like this. Okay. And the Google Scholar, so the address is, you simply type scholar.google.com. So it works just exactly the same way as Google. But only thing is, when you type something here, right, you can select whether it's article or case laws. When you type a topic, the results will be in a more academic way, right? So can you see this? So when you click on the sustainable construction, this is how it comes, right? From all the different sources, it is picking up the topic. But Google Scholar, it all journal papers and conference papers. So you can see the references cited by how many, and the PDFs are available. And also you can filter here whether you want latest papers only for the last 5 years or so. Maybe you can, if you click since 2017, then the same topics, but the later paper, these will not come up. 2010, 2008, 2006, these won't come up. Only the papers that are published after 2017 will come. So it is a good way of, searching the literature. And you can, if you want to really search for an exact phrase, what you need to do is, under the Google Scholar, you put inverted commas. So when you put inverted comma, right, energy efficiency of commercial building, then you get the exact phrase on the results, right? Energy efficiency of commercial building. Energy efficiency of commercial building. If you want to have the same phrase exactly, you must put it in the inverted commas. If you don't put it in the inverted commas, right, it won't come, right? So for example, this paper doesn't have the same phrase. Okay, it has energy, it has commercial building, but it is not the same, exactly the same phrase. If you really want your search to be exact phrase, then you must include inverted commas, right? Or if you want energy efficiency and commercial building, both should be there as two phrases together in the paper. You put an inverted comma for each word, energy efficiency and the commercial building, and add a plus sign in between. So it will pick up all the papers. It has these two terms, energy efficiency also there, the commercial buildings also there. Energy efficiency is there, commercial building is there. It's not a one phrase, but both terms will be there in these papers. So it will filter only the papers which has energy efficiency discussed in a commercial buildings, right? So you can just refine your search to that. You can click here to see the PDF. Any similar article that may be relevant, you can click here, the related articles, because once you have one article, when you click the related articles here, the articles related to these topics, several other articles also will appear, right? And when you have these versions, if different versions, sometimes if the articles are published in different databases, all the different versions will be there, right? And if you click the site, actually the reference also appear, right? So you can easily, if you want to take your reference for your dissertation, you can easily get the reference from there by simply clicking the site. For example, if I just show you scholar.google, okay, if I say whatever, energy efficiency, right? So hope you can see the screen. So if you wanted to find out the citation of this paper, so if you click on the site here, then it will have your citation in different methods, okay? So we are using Harvard or APA, Chicago, MLA, so different citation methods are there. So if you are getting this paper for your MSc, then you click here, then you can copy the citation in your MSc. Some of these cite all the details like page number, some missing information are there. If that is the case, you have to go to the original paper there, and then you have to find out the actual citation, okay? If not, the citation usually appears here as well, okay? And you can filter if I wanted to find out the latest paper since 2022, the papers will come, all the papers appear is 2022, 2023 papers only. Okay, so likewise, you can have the different methods different efficient methods to search for your literature. Okay, so the remote access for library e-resources, I have put the settings here, the slides will be shared. So if you have if the remote access doesn't work, try this proxy settings, which is given by the library, so that sometime if it is not allowing you to access the library remotely, probably you'll have to configure this proxy setting, so that is there what you need to exactly type, right? If it is different, I will double check this information whether these are it is the same proxy setting. I will double check and I will get back to you if there are any differences. But usually this is what we have to use. You can enter your username, password. Your username will be a student email address, and the password will be your usual password that you are using for your emails and everything. The same username and password you can use in order to access the library e-resources from home. Okay, and it is necessary that you use original sources whenever possible, right? What I mean by original sources is when you're doing a literature and you can get several citations within the same literature, but when someone else is citing something in your paper that you are reading, rather than taking sentence from that paper, if you can go to the original articles, then you can better understand what the authors actually says, right? So what I'm talking is you are referring a paper from author A, and the author A has written something which is talked by author X, right? So what I'm suggesting is, rather than taking this sentence of author X from author A, you go to the original source. Okay, so you download the paper written by author X and then take the sentence. The reason I'm telling is because if the A interpreted this paper wrong way and you are taking that from the A's interpretation, then you are also writing is a wrong interpretation. So always it is suggested for the MSc students to, whenever possible, you go to the original article that presented the results rather than someone else's cited article, because these are more reliable. And I already said that original meaning may be distorted in citation due to different interpretations. So if the interpretation of someone else's paper is different, then your interpretation also will be different. So therefore, always try to use the original source, right? And after you doing the search, you have to do the evaluation of the literature. In the evaluation, the initial appraisal is, you have to think about, you have to look at the authors, the credential, institutional affiliation, background, because there should be some affiliations, institutions are there. So that will give you a level of credibility about the paper, who wrote the paper, right? Date of publication is another initial appraisal, because the article, whether it is out of date, okay, or it is a current article, date of publication tells you. If there are books, then you try to see whether it is the latest edition or the revision. Some students use some methodology book, which is 1999, but the latest edition is available in 2020, but they don't use those, right? Same author, but the revised version. Always look for the latest edition, right? If it is further editions, then it will actually enhance the changes in the knowledge, changes in the subject according to the new trend, new technology. The knowledge will be upgraded and reported in the latest edition. So always go with the latest edition. And some websites, sometime you will see whether there are revision dates indicated. So some websites are there, it updated. When is the last updated? The update date is there in websites, then it is good to note it down. If you really, get some literature review from the website, you don't download any papers or anything, make sure what is the latest update date for that, right? And publisher is also one of the, initial appraisal. You had to check whether it is a reliable publishers, right? Because if it is not reliable publisher, you might not always guarantee the quality of the paper. So you should know certain. That's why I suggest you to go to those databases like Scopus, Emerald. They don't publish any journals which are not reliable, right? So if you go to a database and then find out a journal, the database is very reliable because we can trust them. They publish only the quality journals and reliable journals. So if you go to an unknown database and find out a journal paper, sometimes the credibility is not there, right? University Press is another, publisher, which is like Emerald and Scopus. Those are the database, and the University Press is one of the publishers. They're likely to be a scholarly publication. So you should know these names so that when you refer the papers, download the papers, you can see whether if it is from a University Press, then it is a good, reliable source. Title of journal, you have to find out what is the title of journals. Then something like this. So you can see the main things, the edition. This is a book, actually. The construction cost management, learning from case studies. Second edition, right? And the editors are there, right? So first edition published in 2008, this edition published in 2013. So you can see who are the authors and who are the authors and the publishers. Okay, so this will give you some credibility for the articles that you get, right? Journal impact factor is also, you don't need to, too much worry about it. When you browse these databases, you can usually get the high quality journals. But the journal impact factor, it actually provides a measure of the frequency with which average article in a journal has been cited in a year. So the impact factor is mainly, it will be changing from time to time. So how frequently a journal article is downloaded and cited in a different paper within a year, they take based on the number of times the journal is cited. Based on that, they have developed this impact factor for journal. So the high impact factor means this journal article has been referred or frequently cited by many scholar people. So it has high quality, right? So this based on that. So the Science Citation Index and Schemago is one of the ranking of journals. So you should just know these sites. So if you want to really download a journal article, so if you can go to the Schemago, so that can actually give you a very good knowledge about the journal and the articles. So if you want to know whether it's a quality journal, what you are looking, it's not a predatory one, it's a good quality journal. Just check whether the journal name is appearing under one of these sites, right? One of these indexes. If it is coming up, it is popping up. So you go to the Schemago website and type construction management journal. Then if it is coming up, then that is a quality journal. So it is just these tools are available for you to help whether the source that you are looking at is reliable and it has some credibility, right? So first you have the initial, scannings about the credibility of the journal, and then you evaluate the literature by examining the body of the source, right? Who are the intended audience is one of the main thing, because the source is too elementary, too technical, too advanced, so just write for your needs. Because certain articles, it is meant for some type of audience, right? Some papers are there, it's very technical because it is written for technical level audience. Sometimes we don't understand what they are writing, right? So when you are looking at a body of the source, also you see to whom these articles are actually written for, and then you can see whether it is appropriate for you or not. Objective reasoning means if the information provided, whether it's a fact or an opinion or a propaganda, because it all depends on, if it is a research paper, a journal paper, usually it is based on fact and opinion, right? If they have collected some facts from the existing sources and they can collect some opinion or a viewpoints from the interviews, based on that they can get some articles. So how the information was generated, you can find out what is the basis for the articles or the results that appear in the papers, right? The paper has some information, how these results derived. If you know, then you can establish, okay, whether it is useful for your research or not, right? Sometimes the author's point of view will be there. So if the author's point of view is whether it is impartial or partial, and when the language used, right? Some journals, some language used, or some articles may be too biased to one particular group of people, right? And when you are taking such an article and write it to your then dissertation, and your dissertation also will become too biased, right? So you have to see whether it is free from biased and free from emotional words. It is a standalone paper which has any impartiality, right? It shouldn't be partial. So those kind of things you have to actually, when you read the article on C, you will realize whether how these articles were written, right? Whether it is a well-researched or questionable evidence is used, right? Why I'm telling these things is all of these will be addressed if you go to a journal paper, right? Or a conference paper, a peer-reviewed or an index conference paper or a valid journal paper. You don't have to really worry about these questions. because usually the journal papers are published impartially, right? It's a well-researched, right, based on fact and opinion. But if you just get a paper from nowhere, and then if you want to use it for your dissertation, then of course you will have to think about these questions and whether these papers are properly done, you need to know. Okay. And also think about the coverage, whether they have covered up to what depth they have covered, what is the writing style used. So you can evaluate all of these in a literature source. So after searching the paper, you have got the paper in front of you. First, you have to use your initial evaluation based on, the journal type, the scanning one, right? So the scanning one I talked about, sorry. So the author titles, the year, whether it is updated journals or article, who are the publishers reliable or not. And then you do a scanning on the body of the source. You read and see to whom it is written, what are the level of research it is covered, what is the writing styles, whether it is impartial research, whether it's well researched. All of these things you can establish. That is called evaluating the literature sources. Okay, and then you making use of academic reading techniques, right? How do you do that? Is you first narrow down the list of materials for detailed reading, because as I mentioned, you don't have to read everything from the beginning. So soon after you downloaded a paper, don't start reading top to bottom, right? There are techniques that you can use in order to narrow down your reading, right? So you can probably generate more references that you can read. So you have a list, very good of, big list of references related to your article, but you don't need to probably read every single article. So you have like 70 references in front of you. Probably you'll have to read 20 papers only. Because before reading the 70 papers, you have to see whether these 70 papers are really relevant to your research, whether they are useful, whether they have credible, whether they are, good shape, and whether you really useful when you read the paper in full. Without having those evaluation, if you start reading, what will happen is you're going to waste your time really, right? Reading 70 papers, and of which maybe more than 30 papers are not relevant to your research. What will happen then? You have already wasted your time, right? So therefore, when you do the reading, the one good thing is you see the title, right, after downloading, and also abstract, right? When you read the title and the abstract, every paper, usually the journal paper or conference paper, they have an abstract which is like roughly 300 words, 250 to 300 words, which you can read. So when you read the title and the abstract actually tells the gist of the paper. What is the paper is all about. The abstract, if it is a good abstract, it should give you a very good understanding about the whole paper. Right? And then you can decide whether it is worth reading the whole paper. If the abstract looks good, if the abstract looks relevant, then you can decide whether you can read the full paper. Right? For that, you can actually use some academic techniques for the reading techniques. So those techniques, I'll quickly tell you the techniques and give you a break, right? Scanning, skimming, and detailed reading. So those are the 3 academic reading techniques. So what do you mean by scanning is, it's just moving your eyes quickly to locate the word phrases that are useful or relevant, right? One way of scanning is looking up only the name, the headings, right? It's like looking up the name in a phone book. You just scan it. You don't really read it. But when you read a paper, when you look at a paper, you just scan the major words or the headings, the titles, the subheadings of the paper. Then you can easily know, without even reading, by scanning a paper, you can get an understanding whether this paper is relevant or not. Okay? So you can scan part of the text to determine whether the usefulness for your purpose. Right? The one thing is the abstract or the introduction or preface, right? Probably you can scan the first and the last paragraph of the chapters. You don't have to read the whole chapter. Maybe if you go to a literature review, the first chapter and the last chapter, last paragraph can give you an indication what is written there, right? Or probably the conclusions of the paper. The conclusion chapters or concluding sections, it is good to read. So what I advise you is when you, after collecting your number of papers, so you downloaded all the PDFs in your computer, and you first do the scanning to see whether these papers are useful before you go for the detailed reading. Otherwise, you'll be wasting your time, right? Skimming is a little more detailed than scanning, but not like detailed as the detailed reading, right? It's skim throughing, right? Scanning is not even reading, actually. It's just scanning, looking at the headings and the major things, looking for the keywords and the variables that are relevant to your research. And skimming it's just help you to get a general idea of a text. You skim through means you read a little bit more than the scanning, right? Maybe mainly get the reading very quickly to get the main points, right? You can skip the overall detail over the details, but you don't go to a very detailed points, but the main points you can skip, you can get, right? So you can use these techniques to preview a passage before detailed reading. So before you start the detailed reading, to decide whether you want to read it or not, you can do a skim read, right? And quickly decide whether the text is useful for you, right? So the first you do the scanning to select the papers. After selecting the paper, so you can do the skimmed reading, where you can decide whether you need a detailed reading or not. Some papers, even with the skim reading, you can develop some literature, right? So the first thing is, so if you have like 50 papers, you select like 20 papers out of that you can do it through the scanning. But among the 20 papers, you don't have to detail read all 20 papers. Maybe only 10 papers you have to detail read, 10 papers you have to skim read. It all depends on how relevant the paper is, right? And then the detailed reading is, if you find it, some of the readings are very relevant, then of course you can go for a detailed reading, right? So the detailed reading it is actually carefully reading the text, okay? You think about who is the author, what is the main purpose of this paper, whether to offer advice to you or whether to make some practical suggestions, whether to solve a specific problem or whether to critique something, whether to establish a truth. What is the main purpose of the author? So you have to, when you do a careful reading, you can answer those questions. What are the methodology that they have used? Who is the intended audience to whom the paper is written? It is for the practitioners, or it is for the academics, it is for the school children, it is for the policymakers, to whom the paper is meant to be. What is the main point? What are the conclusions? What is your main problem? Okay, and how the authors support their position, right? What are the evidence they provide? They do a conclusion, they provide a conclusion, they provide a solution based on what? What is the research they have done? All of these details that you can find out only if you do a detailed screening, right? And how does this problem fit into the context? Whether this is cited anywhere else, whether it is agreed or disagreed by other studies. And what is this particular paper or the reading that you are detailed reading, how it is related to your own dissertation or your own topic. Okay, so you can establish all this in this detailed reading. Okay, so always remember, when you have a search, so you have looked at what is the search, what are the different search engines, and you have to quickly evaluate for the initial credibility of the papers gathered. And to do the reading for the literature, you don't have to do the detailed reading for every single reference that you have collected. Probably you'll have to do the scanning and skimming and then go to the detailed reading. So that will really help you to read what is really relevant and necessary for you to read rather than reading everything that you gathered. Okay. And finally, as a good practice, I have already mentioned, you have to make a record. Every paper that you read, make a record of it. You can have a small, the Excel database or a manual or computerized database, something like this, title of the paper or a chapter, journal or a book name, author's name, year, what is the methodology used. So if they have used case study, you can just write case study here, or questionnaire or interviews, focus group, whatever the methodology they use, you can just put. And summary, that means the paper is usually runs to like 15 pages, generally 11 to 15 pages in a journal paper, right? But you write the whole paper in just one sentence. So this paper explores the barriers and or strategies to improve the health and safety practices in construction. Or this paper talks about the policy level changes the project managers should adhere when following the health and safety. Okay, what is the paper talks about? In your own words, just give a small summary. And also, what are the key words that are identified in the paper? Right? So when you use the above table to structure your literature chapter, then you don't need to read every A to Z each time, right? So you have every one time when you read a paper, you establish this particular record, then you can easily know. So when you're writing a literature chapter, you know, okay, this is the paper you have to again refer in order to write the section of this literature. So you can easily relate your literature chapter with your paper collection. Otherwise, what will happen is you already know, you have read somewhere, but you don't know where. Then you have to again going through all the papers all the time again in order to find out, because you don't remember, because you're reading a lot of papers now. So when you're reading one after the other, sometimes you remember what you read, the content you remember, but you forget where did you read that. You forget which paper, which journal, which author, which year. If you forget all of these, what will happen is, in order to get that knowledge again, you have to again go through all the papers. So in order to avoid that, it is good that you establish a record keeping practice when you start with your first paper that you read for your literature review, right? Any paper, you must read the abstract. Don't forget to read the abstract. Research methodology, it tells you how rigorous the research is, whether it's a proper valid research, and the conclusions. If you read all these three, you can get an overall idea about the paper, right? And if you feel that is relevant, useful, then you read the full paper, right? And also I mentioned, keep looking at the list of references to find more papers on the same field. Okay, so once you start reading, ensure that you think about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to get out of each article and book that you read, right? This is, some example here. So how it is the main outcomes and relevant findings, how they have summarized each and every paper. So have a good practice, keep a record, a list of all the references, and keep all the notes on what you have read. Okay, and that will actually enable you to write up your literature chapter without even returning to the sources you have read. If you have a comprehensive table like that, you can even, based on this table, you can develop your literature chapter. Okay, so what you have basically looked at for this session is, you have how to search the literature, how to, the step-by-step process of planning your literature, and how to do the search, and how to review the literature, and how to evaluate the materials, and then finally to analyze and draft your view. So I'll give you a break, maybe 5 minutes, just to, because it's 2 hours you're sitting in front of computer, which is not good. So take a walk and come round, have some water or tea or whatever. Shall I give you like 10 minutes? And the next hour, what I'm going to look at it, a critical review of literature. So that is after you have downloaded, after you have selected your papers, this lecture mainly lead you to the point up to where you select your number of papers for your literature review. But once you have done with that, so you now have, you know what are the exact papers that you need to read, and you have the set of papers in front of you. Then using that, what you need to do is the one I am going to talk about for the next hour after the break. Okay, so do you have any questions from this section, this part of the lecture? You can please ask. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'll start again in 10 minutes. Right? We will continue after 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, hope I can continue now. Can I? Okay, this part of lecture, what I'm going to mainly focus on is critical review of the literature, right? So we have already looked at what is literature review and why it is important, right? And what is the process of a literature review, starting with the planning until, searching and evaluation and then analysis and writing. So this analysis and writing part is the one that we are going to focus more in this particular session. So when you say I also would like to just touch the gaps identification, because that is one of the key activities that you have to do when you want to refer, or when you want to read a literature, or when you want to write a literature as part of your research. The one main thing they will ask is, what is your gap in the knowledge, right? So you need to understand, at least to have a basic understanding by now, what do you mean by a gap in knowledge. So I would like to just tell you, give a basic understanding about what is gap in knowledge, and when to start and when to finish the literature review process, especially when you focus on your dissertation. When you assume that you started doing a dissertation, or you are in an early stage of doing the dissertation, the literature review, basically, if you look at the research progress, you start your research progress. The key stages of your research progress are usually falling under these areas, like you first identify a broad area, and then you do some background studies, right? And then you do your topic selection, the specific topic that you are going to do as part of your MSc. And then you develop your aims and objectives, and then you narrow it down further in order to, focus your research on a particular context or an element. And then probably if you do some quantitative thing, you will develop some hypothesis or some research question to test, which address your aims and objective. And then you develop your research methodology, what is the overall strategy, and what are the data collection techniques and data analysis techniques, before you do your conclusions and recommendations, so the final part of your dissertation. So for you to start with the broad area, you need to really get yourself familiarized, and you should know what has already been done in that area and what needs to be done in that area. So that you need to really refer the literature review, which is the purpose of that literature review at the initial stages, is to find out some background studies and the knowledge, okay, or to identify the gap in the knowledge, something like that. You have to, and to familiarize yourself. For those purposes, you start to do some literature review. And later on, when you have decided the topic and aims and objectives, so once the aims and objectives is done, you know exactly what you're going to do, because the aims and objectives tells you what you are doing or what you're going to do as part of your research, right? And then, of course, in order to address part of the objectives, then you have to do your review, synthesizing of the literature, and critically analyze the literature review, and identify the gaps further in order to develop your research focus. And then you have to define the problem, and then the aims and objectives will help you to once you define your problem, then you can easily generate aims and objectives, right? And then in the research focus, that is selecting or narrowing down your research. So in order to narrow down to a specific scope or a context, you need to read a literature, because without reading, you don't know whether this research is more relevant in this sector than the other industry. This industry should be taken, right? Or this risk is high in high-rise building rather than low-rise building. So for you to decide on where to place your research, narrowing down your scope and limitation, without doing the literature review, you cannot do it really, right? And research strategy also, and the data collection and techniques, because the research, the literature the papers that you read, some other journal papers that are done on your similar research area, and by going through their methodology, you can get an understanding what is the methodology that you have to use in your research, right? You don't only study the subject area, you also study the process, the methodology used to address the problem by other researchers. So you can use a similar methodology, and you can use that as a justification for your methodology selection, right? Even for the methodology, you need to understand the overall philosophy and what are the methods used in similar research, Without reading the literature, this is not going to be possible, right? And similar way, the data collection. What are the collection techniques, analysis techniques? Even there are research methodology literature, how to conduct an interview, how to analyze an interview data, how many interviews to be conducted, how to select the samples, what are the sampling techniques available. For all of these, you have to read literature, right? And finally, to conclusions, even when you're drawing the conclusion from your primary data, again, you need to read the literature, mainly to compare and contrast your findings against what is you have found out. So you already started with the literature and slowly move on to the data collection. And once you have collected the primary data, when you do the primary data, then you collect your data primarily by yourself, and you have the findings, set of findings which you gathered and you collected and you analyzed and you produced. Then what you do is you compare that your findings with the existing literature findings. Okay, you just compare and contrast. Okay, your findings came up like this. Whether this is similar with the existing literature, whether it is your findings are contrasting to existing literature, whether it is agreeing or whether it is a disagreement. So how far it is, your findings can be placed within the existing knowledge. Likewise, even after the conclusion drawing, you will have to read some papers in order to ensure whether your findings, how similar or how different your findings are. So basically speaking, throughout the research process, from starting with identifying the broad area until you drawing your conclusions of your research, the literature review will play a critical part. So you need to start, so you cannot just start the literature now and you cannot say, okay, the literature review chapter is done, so you don't need to read literature anymore. So that kind of an activity will not actually helpful, because you need to read the literature throughout the process of research, right? Whether you do a literature review, whether you finish your literature review, doesn't matter. Your literature review of literature is a part and parcel of your research throughout the process. So don't forget that. So you must read the literature throughout your process. So when you say the gaps identification, so what is the research gap? There are several definitions actually. So some define the research gap is the problem discovered after you conducted a rigorous literature review, right? So this is kind of a problem. After you do a literature review, you have come up with, okay, this is the problem. This is the key problem that you want to address. Then that is a research gap, right? It is also defined as a topic or an area which missing or insufficient information limits the ability to reach a conclusion for a question. So it is still considered an under-research area, right? The problem is still there. It is not fully addressed. Still, it is a research gap because the problem is there. There are solutions by other researchers, but it is still, there are missing information. There are gaps. So you can still call that as a gaps, right? And the research need is defined as a gap that limits the ability of decision makers for making decisions, right? So when you say it doesn't give you enough information for a decision makers to come up with the solution or a making a decision, then you can always see there is a gap in the knowledge, right? So all of these different definitions, so I just actually got the definitions from internet sources. All of these different definitions, what they are trying to tell you is, when there is an area of knowledge where you clearly see a problem which still needs to be addressed, okay, currently valid problem, which has not been addressed or answered fully by other researchers, then you can always find there is a gap in the knowledge. Okay, so that is how you have to identify it. But how do you identify that? Because you can say that's okay, there is a problem, but how do you know that it is not addressed fully? Or how do you know whether it is partly addressed, but still the problem exists? So how do you identify? So you should know how do you identify your gap, right? For that, you need to do a rigorous literature review in order to identify the problem, right? So that's why I emphasize you to go with the current literature, right? Not outdated ones. Then only you can argue, okay, the problem is still exists. Even in the present context, this is the problem. For you to argue that, your literature should be very recent, current literature, right? So you can't just take a literature which is 10 years older, right? Something published in 2013, right? And based on that literature, you cannot argue this problem exists, because after that 10 years, probably the problem may have solved, right? May have been solved by someone else, who knows? So always make sure when you do a gap identification, always make sure that you put the evidence with the recent citations and references. So when you're reading, you identify the problem, and also you identify partial solution, because you are not the only person who is doing a research on that area, right? Any area that you select, you can find there are several people who are doing research on that area. Okay, so then you're not the only person. So all the other researchers also have done some kind of a solution, partial solution for a problem. However, even though you can find solution by other researchers for the same problem that you are trying to address, if you can still prove that the problem is still there, out there in the industry, then you can say it is still a gap, right? Right? Something like when you say, we'll say skill shortages in the industry. So I always prefer the construction industry, my background. But if you are from a different industry, please relate the example to industry. So the skill shortages is a problem for many years, many years in the construction industry, right? Still, we don't have a solution for that. So it is a current problem, right? So there are several research conducted how to find out what are the reasons for the skill shortages. There is a communication gap between the universities and the industry, because they don't produce the graduates with the necessary skill that are expected by the industry. Or is it the problem with people fleeing out of the country, so there's a sudden skill gap in there? Is it the skill shortages is because of the lack of number of people, or the enough people are there but they don't have the necessary skills? So the problem with the skills learning. So some researchers have found out the causes for the problem. Some have identified the solutions, partly solution. They have done, you have to improve the academic industry collaboration. You have to do trainings for the people, plant training, right? So likewise, there are solutions as well. But still, if you can still prove, okay, when you go to the current literature, the current skills mismatches and skill shortages is a huge problem in the industry still. So what you can do is, okay, you can take that as a gap, because still the problem is there. Even though there are a lot of solutions, you will approach the problem in a different way. Not the way that all others have done. You are not going to repeat the same research. The problem is same, but the solution that you are trying to provide is maybe partly completely different. Then it is your own research. You have your novelty. So that is how you develop your gap. Okay. So one thing you need to make sure the problem is still existing. The second thing you need to make sure your approach or the solution that you are providing is not already provided by someone else. Okay. As long as these two things are clear, then you have a very clear gap for your research to conduct. So you need to submit convincing evidence to justify that the need for the research still exists in the context. That's why I said always provide with the current literature, so you can justify, okay, the problem is still a problem currently in the current context. So when you provide recent literature, 2020, 2021 too, then you can always argue the problem is there, right? And most importantly, most of the researches are context specific, so that you need to understand, because you can come from, you could come from different backgrounds. In the sense, your working, your educational background can be totally different from one another, right? So when you do your research, when you place your research, you will place your research in the context that you are familiar with, right? I cannot do a research for a medical industry or a healthcare sector because I have nothing to do with that. I don't have any knowledge. My background is built environment construction, right? But if you are coming from a healthcare sector, then probably you can place your research in the healthcare sector rather than a built environment sector. If you are coming from a manufacturing, then you can place your context as in a manufacturing. If you're coming from an educational institution, so you're part of an educational institution, right? And you can maybe your problem, you can identify your problem within an educational sector and your context will become an education, right? So all the problems are context specific, most of it, right? Therefore, whatever the problem that you identify, if you can, it should be clearly defined within the specific context, right? Problem can be common, but when it's the scale of the problem, the need of the problem, the validity of the problem, the significance of the problem completely differ when you change the context. Okay? If you talk about financial struggles of the small and medium scale businesses, in Sri Lanka is completely different from financial struggle, how the financial struggles are tackled in a foreign country. Yeah. Financial struggles for small, medium scale businesses can be a common problem. But when you put the problem in Sri Lanka, and when you put the problem in Malaysia, when you put the problem in United Kingdom, the scale of the problem completely differ. And the solution that you need to develop should be completely changed because you are changing the context. Okay. So whenever you are talking about research, always think there are two things that you need to always consider about. One is the context. Other one is the problem. Right? Because the research is context specific, therefore one problem will have different impacts, different solution, different nature, different scale, depending on the context. So always make sure when you are talking about a problem, always for you, right? Research problems are something like this. These are common. Reconstruction. Sorry, I think I got disconnected. Okay, so you have the research problems, generic problems. These problems can fit into any context, but when you put the problem into a particular context, the nature of the problem changes. The scale of the problem changes, the impact of the problem changes, and the solution also accordingly will have to be changed. So if you say context, you can put several contexts, like I have put only few here. Construction industry, women managers, for example, disaster reconstruction, health sector. Likewise, there can be several contexts. So what you can do is you can connect the problems to a context, right? When you say health and safety in construction industry, it's different than health and safety in a health sector, right? So health and safety can be a common research problem. But when you want to do a research looking at the health and safety within a construction industry, and when someone else want to do a health and safety within a health sector, the solutions and even the problem will completely different. Right? If you want to say leadership, you can want to, gender specific, like if you want to mainly look at the leadership of women managers, that is your context. You are narrowing down to a particular gender. Right? Risk management, again, context varies, risk varies. Sets risk management in a manufacturing organization, risk management in a factory, risk in a health sector, all vary. All the nature of the problem varies. So you need to understand when you talk about a research, the two components must be presented. One is the problem, which is a common phenomenon. But your research will become unique when you define your context. You have to put the problem within a context in order to identify the gap. Right? Otherwise, it's very broad for you to do a research without having a boundary or without having a context. You can't just, improving health and safety generally. How do you collect the data? How do you find out the people? Okay, where is your focus? It's very difficult to do a research as a general term. Okay. Maybe you can have more than one context. If you want to say leadership styles exhibited by women managers who are working in the construction industry. Likewise, you can combine more than one context, but whatever it is, you are focusing in a one particular context. Okay. So if you can clearly define that, as long as at least you can, because the health and safety, the problem is done by so many, you can find so many researchers doing the same topic, health and safety related research. So many people are doing. But when it's come to health and safety within construction industry, okay, few people are doing. Health and safety within construction industry in Sri Lanka, again, few people are doing. Right? And if you want to look constructions, health and safety within the residential high-rise buildings in Sri Lanka, probably you are the only one who is doing. That is how you want to research, right? In the knowledge means, assume this is your research problem, right? And there are so many contributions from several scholars. They have contributed to this problem. They have done a research for this problem within the context, and they have produced so many findings and all. But still there are a lot of gaps. The problem is there, right? So these are solutions, right? And your contribution is somewhere here, right? No matter how small this dot is, as long as your contribution is unique, it is not overlapping with someone else's work, you qualify for a novel research. Your research will qualify for a novel research. Okay, so always when you try to identify a topic and try to do a research for your MSc, always think about what is your problem. You should be very clearly should see what is your problem and what is your context. Okay, and then considering both, you identify the gap. Okay, so in order to identify the gap, you have to critically review the literature. And when you do the critical writing part, before the writing, you have to pass a stage of process of analyzing, right? So the few slides I have actually not going to go through all the slides in detail, because what I have done here is I've actually produced a list of questions for you, right? Probably if I do it now, it might not be very worth it for you. But at the time of you doing your literature review for your dissertation, right? Probably it is too early for you to start now if you haven't, even thought about the topics or anything, then it might be probably too early. But when you do your literature, I have put this some of the questions under the topics. I wanted you to, revisit the slides, and you have to ask this question again and again and again throughout the process. So that will help you to keep you on the track and help you to do an efficient literature review, a critical literature review for you, right? So that is one of the purpose I wanted to just show you, but I'm not going to, go through or explain each and every. Most of the questions are self-explanatory. So you don't need additional explanation. Say, for example, if you want to collect the necessary knowledge, what information should I gather? Where should I look for it? How will I be able to obtain it? What should I do with it when I have it? When will I need to use it? How will I know if I have enough? That's one of the very difficult questions to answer. I also don't know the answer, because when you start doing the literature review, sometimes you collect data, read papers after paper, but you don't know when to stop, right? So for that, what is necessary is, if you have a very clear goal, right, or when to stop. If you feel that you have enough information for what you're looking for, then you can stop. Okay. So those are the questions I wanted you to think about it. And when you do critical synopsis of a text, this is mainly for the collecting the knowledge or gathering the knowledge for searching literature. When you're reading a text, always ask the question, why am I reading this? What are the authors trying to say in writing this? You ask this question and you try to find out the answer within the paper that you are reading, then your reading will become more critical. Without thinking about these questions, if you read, okay, I'll tell you, if you read just without thinking about or try to answer any of these questions, what will happen is, at the end of the reading, you will get nothing out of it, right? Because you don't know how to use what you have read. Because you have read, in order to read, you need to spend time. After spending time reading a paper, if you cannot make use of that paper, then it's complete, it will become a complete waste of effort and complete waste of your time, right? So always make sure when you're reading a paper, you have to keep on asking questions again and again and again, so that you try to answer that question, and you try to focus your reading to look for these answers. Find out. If you don't find a relevance, then you are reading something wrong, right? How convincing is what the authors are saying, whether they have done a proper research, they have collected the data properly, they have conducted enough, questionnaires or interviews or whatever, they have done a rigorous, proper methodology, or they are just telling out of nowhere, they are coming to a conclusion, the paper doesn't show anything about the methodology, then you don't doubt the credibility of the paper, right? So how convincing you are and what you can use it, that is a conclusion, right? What can I use? What use can you make out of this paper, right? So that is some of the critical synopsis that you have to do. Critical reading, when after reading a paper, so the paper usually runs into 10 to 15 pages, right? 10 to 12 pages standard. Some papers are actually longer than that. What is the main claim? You should be able to just answer, this paper talks about this. Likewise, just one sentence, if you can establish what is the main claim that the authors are trying to, main point that the authors are trying to make out of this paper, then your reading is done, right? And in order to do that, how much backing they are doing. So you cannot just give bold statement without having any proper evidence or references. Okay, so they have how transparent it is. So they are telling something, they are claiming, okay, these particular causes are the main reason for lack of management, lack of efficiency in project management. They have come up with a list of reasons. On what basis they are giving the reasons? What is the transparency? Have they done a proper research? Or have they established that through a literature review? How transparent their work is? Whether they have enough backing for what is their claim. Okay. And to what extent this claim supported or challenged by other workers. So you read one paper and there is a claim. Claim is the argument, it's anything, the statement, argumentable statement is called as a claim. So every paper, the authors are trying to make a claim. Right? So whether the arguments are accepted by others or not, you can read that from different papers. You can see whether this claim is really acceptable or not. Right? And what extent these claims are consistent with your experience, because you also have some background knowledge and your industry, you know about your industry, know about the stuff, right? You study about the stuff, you have seen things. And when you're reading a paper, you can judge, okay, whether these claims are actually practical or acceptable, whether it is consistent with your experience. Right? And critical writing, when you do the writing, always make sure that you keep your audience in mind all the time and write for them, right? If you're writing a dissertation, your audience will be probably your supervisor, right? Your examiners and all the, dissertation future students who are going to follow MSc probably will read your dissertation. Okay, so you can be a little, it's okay to have a little bit technical if you want to write a dissertation, because all the people who are reading your dissertation will have some sort of a knowledge on the subject, at least educational level will be there. Right? But if you publish that your dissertation, based on your research, you are going to put a newspaper article. Then you have to keep your audience in mind. So newspaper is read by literally everybody, right? So you can't just provide some too much technical jargons in your newspaper articles, then people will not get it. There are a lot of people, layperson point of view, they don't have the knowledge, the technical knowledge about your subject, but still they should be able to understand your research. Okay, so to whom you're writing matters. So when you're writing critical writing, try to make the sentences as simple as possible. Try to keep the language as simple as possible. You don't have to use very high level, sophisticated, difficult vocabs or terminologies. You make it simple, right? Your research can be rigorous, but your language should be very plain language. It's the best language to convey your message to the wider context or wider audience. And also, when you're writing the literature, always make sure you develop a structure for your writing. Rather than having a structure, if you just start writing, it will be difficult for you to, connect various sections, linking various sections. Structure in the sense is kind of a table of contents. For your literature chapter, what are the main headings? What are the subheadings? What are the subheadings? Before start writing, you have a structure in place. That is a loose structure. You don't have to be, very rigid structure. But as and when you develop your literature, you can here and there alter the structure. That's absolutely fine. But without having a structure, when you start a chapter writing, that will be really difficult for you to organize in a systematic way, right? So when you do a structure, then everything that you want to cover as part of your literature, you already know, right? Then you can put headings accordingly and then start writing it. More than just descriptive, evaluate the present and inform the reader. Right? So it's not like a descriptive writing. This author said this, that author said that, like that. It's not a descriptive way or reporting way. right? You also have to evaluate what you present. Whether you agree, whether you disagree. If you agree, why you agree. If you disagree, why you disagree. You have to inform the readers how good you are in analyzing the context or analyzing the literature that you have read. You're not just reporting by reading and reporting. It's not that what you're doing. You're critically writing. So always keep that in mind. Provide evidence to underpin your arguments. Just like critical reading, we are looking for evidence. No? So when someone is claiming, an author is claiming something, you still see, okay, on what basis he is telling that? What is the evidence? Likewise, when you read also, you look for it. So the similar way, when you write, others will look for it. So you have to give your evidence. Keep your writing relevant. Make sure your reader knows why it is relevant. And remind the reader the key points. When you write large chapters or large sections, at the end of each section, you can give a small summary. Okay, what this whole section talked about. So the readers it will help the readers to, keep on the track, and they can remind the points. You remember everything because it is your research, inside out of your research, but you can't expect the same level of knowledge from every reader. Even your supervisor does not have to have your knowledge, right? The supervisors are there merely to help you with the process, taking you through the process of doing an MSc. And they are not doing your research. You have to be very clear about it. You don't expect the supervisor to have knowledge about your subject, right? Even if you are doing research on BIM, the supervisor doesn't have a clue about what is BIM. It doesn't matter, right? That is not going to, because you are the one who is going to do the research, but the supervisor will actually help you how to do the research and how to, continue the research with the right process. They will be always there advising you that. Okay, so you have to keep your sections and the writing catering to a wider audience, right? Things you need to do when you write a critical review of literature. You have to look for the right information, read whether you like it or not. You cannot avoid reading. Okay, so if you want to do a literature, you must read, right? And skim read only what is relevant, and then quickly establish the worthiness of the material and organize the data, and then find, analyze, and synthesize. Identify the common issues, patterns, and controversy when you're doing the synthesizing. So I'll quickly tell you what is the difference between analyze and synthesis. It's past 7. With that, I will, quickly finish. Okay, hope I can take another 10 minutes of your time, if that is okay. So you have to build logical arguments, develop issues, and develop themes. So if you don't understand some of these terms, you don't worry now, because when you are doing your actual work, then you will come across what is lazy. Because if I explain everything to you, it will become like too heavy for you right now. Because if you're not doing the job right now, if you're not in a state where you are doing the literature right now, these might look very heavy and too much for you, right? But always keep this slide, so when the time that you start doing your review, it will be really helpful. Okay, so you have to make connections between the ideas. That is very important. Don't write in individual or silo approach. Whatever the concept that you do, you have to mix and match and connect everything. Okay, then report, reference, and present. So I'll just mainly tell the difference between analysis and synthesis. I'm not going to go through the whole, components here. When you do analysis, there's a difference between analysis and synthesis. We'll see that you have 5 papers on a particular subject. When you take one paper and then you analyze the paper, right? What is the main claim the author is telling? On what basis they are giving? What is the evidence they have supported, right? How the evidence and the claims are related, right? What are the assumptions? What are the contexts they have used? So individually, when you do systematically extracting the key ideas and concept of a paper, we call that as an analysis, right? So I said you have 5 papers of that. So you will do basically 5 different analyses on individual paper, right? And synthesis means it is not about individual paper. You're taking all 5 papers across and find out what is because all 5 papers are relevant papers, relevant subject, same subject. So across the 5 papers, what is the common element? What is the conclusion that you can come up with? Is there are any, common elements, or if there are any controversial arguments between the paper? So you kind of like where the similarity and differences you have to find out. Examples you can find out across different paper. So that is called synthesis. So when you have analyze and synthesize, there are 2 different things. Analysis is done on individual papers, whereas synthesis is done across different papers. Okay, so that you just keep that in mind. No need to, read all these, because this is I have given here as a technical definitions of synthesis and analysis. The easy way to remember is individual paper, what you do is an analysis, in-depth analysis on extracting the key ideas. But across different papers, more than one paper, when you come up between the papers or identify any controversial arguments between the paper, that you can call as a synthesis. The difficulties you may face, there are so many difficulties, even though I say the literature review, it's a straightforward process. It is, when you do that, you feel it is not like very easy piece of cake, because it is difficult. Because especially when you're doing it for the first time, it will be difficult. So don't worry if you find it difficult. That is, you are not alone. It is everyone get into that state anyway, right? Main thing is to find out whether you have the right information, ensure the literature you are looking at the right one. Sometimes it is not straightforward, okay? You cannot even see whether it is the right information or not. It is the right paper that you are reading or not. Sometimes it's not difficult it's not a straightforward decision that you can easily establish. So it is difficult. And it is easy to get lost. Everything seems important. When you take a paper, 12 pages, every single sentence seems important to you. So where to take the message, what to leave, what to take. Sometimes when you read more, you get confused more and you get lost in the middle of so many information. Okay, so that is possible. So when you read more and more papers, you may lose the focus. So keep asking why you are reading this. Okay, building a coherent argument. I tell you that you have to build a coherent argument, a logical argument, but it is not an easy task. Okay, I should admit that it is hard. Okay, when you write the literature, connecting with different ideas, collecting and giving your own interpretation and writing a literature is not easy, right? But it is doable. Okay, so when you have more practice with the experience of developing a dissertation with the literature review, it is doable, right? Even though it is difficult. Finally, when you're writing the literature, the few tips I just wanted to, tell you. Make sure you have read and understood the cited work. Include only the work that is relevant to your research paper. Okay, do not write, right? And organize your content according to the ideas instead of according to the publication. I already told this. You don't need to summarize one paper and write about it, the second paper, then write about it. Likewise, paper by paper, author by author, do not write. You have to first do all the reading and collectively get the knowledge, synthesize it. All 5 papers talks about these ideas, then summarize it. Right? So idea by idea you have to write rather than author by author. You have to synthesize. So beware of the plagiarism. Always make sure that you give citation when referring to other works. So when you do the synthesizing, you have to, what is the synthesis means is, It's important that concepts are presented in knowledge. So when you are doing your research within your context, it should make sense, right? Always when you are writing, the concepts are falling naturally within your context, right? So I told you what is a context is. So these concepts are related to your context. So that is very important. So how you can do it is when you do the structure, right? So I already told you this. Before you write the literature, when you do the structure, then you can easily, place your problem and the concept within your context. So doing an outline plan is a good way. You can experiment different structures. Those are minor points. And a common error, I again insist, is usually you do present a material from one author, followed by another author, then another author. Likewise, some students clearly write one paragraph, one reference, second paragraph, another reference, third paragraph, another reference. When the paragraph looks like that, it clearly shows that you are just reporting paper by paper, right? Rather than that, what you have to do is you actually link all the papers together and probably write one paragraph with 3 or 4 references. So that will show that you are actually synthesizing. Okay, so there are some tips for you to, how to write a synthesis. It is the tips in the sense I'm not going to give you big things. I only introduce some words, right? Something like, grouping authors who draw similar conclusions. So if you read 2 different papers and you find author A and author B are talking about the same thing, they are agreeing on the same idea, probably when you connect those 2 papers, you can use the words like also, additionally, again, similarly. Okay. And when the authors disagree, the linking words will be different. You can use the words like however, on the other hand, conversely, in contrast, right? So it is you who should put these words, because when you put similarly, so author A says these things, similarly, author B say also these things. When you put the word similarly, then it is something that you are doing more than just writing, mere reporting. Okay. And when the authors disagree, you put the words like however. So what it shows is, you as a researcher, 2 people are talking on the same things, or these 2 people are not disagreeing on each other. So that shows that you are actually synthesizing the literature rather than merely reporting. So always use as much as possible the linking words so that you can show that you are synthesizing your literature rather than just writing your literature. Okay. If you want to qualify an author's work, you can use some usually, generally, specifically, some qualifying words. If you want to use as an example, you can use the words like, for example, thus, namely, to illustrate. So you can use the language from, English language, whatever the words that you can use in order to, address this as an example, right? So by doing so, actually, you are synthesizing the material rather than just describing, right? So some students write the literature without using these words, right? If you don't use those words, then it is very difficult to see whether you are. These are some of the tips when you write the synthesizing literature. After analyzing the individual paper, you actually synthesizing, right? All rest of the rest of the aims, objectives, and major problem, everything is connected and linked. You have to make sure, right? At the end of the review, include a summary of what you have written and also include a link for the future, the next section. So the section 2.3 to 2.4, when you move, you can write, okay, section 2.2 talks about these courses. Checklist, I'm not going to read you again. What is to selection of sources, what you have to do, critical evaluation, what is the final checklist based on what we have discussed. I have given the questions. So the questions will be useful when you have, when you actually doing your literature. If you have this set of slides downloaded with you, and always make sure that you ask this question again and again, and then it's help you to do a very rigorous literature review rather than a mere reporting of others' work. Okay, so with that, I will, conclude my session. It's 2 hours exactly. Thank you for listening. Do you have any questions? You can ask now. If you have anything to be clarified in the literature, please ask. If not, we can simply conclude. And tomorrow, hope that you are aware that the lecture time is from 8 to 11. Are you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's 8 to 11. It's not 9 to 12. 9 to 12, I think it's your usual time. But I requested because I have some other session starting at 11:30. So I thought of advancing it to 1 hour. So tomorrow we will be focusing on qualitative research. It's a completely different session. Not like today, it's about the literature. And tomorrow we are going to move on to the qualitative research method, right? So what is the stage that you are in your, you have started your second year, right? Am I right? Can someone tell me what is the, in terms of the research, what have you identified topics for your research?
No, ma'am, still not.
You have not identified topics and your supervisors were not allocated yet?
Yes, ma'am. Supervisors not allocated, and still we didn't go through the research area.
Okay, but you have finished your modules and all, right?
Sorry, ma'am?
Sorry, I think I got disconnected. Okay, so if you don't have questions, shall we wind it up for today? And I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Okay, good night.
Thank you, ma'am.